Good morning. Welcome to this accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepherd, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Prophet, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. These meetings are designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the performance and work of Hertfordshire Constabulary. The meetings are webcast live to the public for transparency. There's no ability for the public to ask questions, but we hope to find the topics in the conversation that we have interesting and useful. On the agenda today, we're going to be covering, in this order, stalking, a national report around the policing of online child sexual abuse and management of registered sex offenders, released under investigation, burglary outcomes, and citizens in policing. I'm going to start then with stalking, a crime type that can be quite horrific in terms of the impact it has on people's lives and confidence, and an important part, in particular, of tackling violence against women and girls. It's an important one to have a look at. Perhaps, Chief, I'd ask you just to start by just giving the kind of context of the number of stalking cases recorded by the Constabulary over the last year and the outcomes of them. And good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you. Yes, of course. Stalking is a really awful crime where an individual will deliberately go out of their way to cause misery to another by stalking them, maybe physically or in the online space. So it's a really serious matter and often tends to be connected with domestic abuse type issues. In the 12 months to concluding March this year, the Constabulary recorded just over 3,000 stalking offences. That compared to the previous 12 months, just short of 2,700 offences. So we saw an increase of about 10% over the last 12 months. They're difficult offences to investigate, prove very often. And sadly, we are not solving as many of them as I would like. In the last 12 months, we successfully solved 256 cases, which is just short of 10%. We clearly have work to do and a very clear ambition to do better than that. If you take the last 3 months of data, we've started to do marginally better, but it is marginally better, solving 11.5%. But there's a really clear focus for the Constabulary and my teams to work really hard to get better at investigating and solving this horrible crime.
Thank you. And to just pick up then some of that, starting perhaps with that increase year on year. Obviously, stalking was one of the things identified by the inspectorate around the under-recording of crime that had been identified as an issue previously in Hertfordshire, and that was around some stalking and harassment cases being kind of categorised as antisocial behaviour rather than as crimes. Is that 10% increase primarily linked to, in your view, improved recording rather than increased crime? And are you satisfied that historic under-recording of stalking offences has now been broadly resolved?
Yes, that is my insight and my assumption. The Constabulary has put a huge amount of effort into getting our recording practices right, as we've talked about on a number of previous occasions. So right from the very initial contact we have, our systems prompt our officers and staff with the right information to identify the right offences and get the right crimes recorded. We've trained significantly and extensively specialist teams of officers and staff to get the recording and the risk assessment right. We track and monitor the rate at which we record stalking and harassment cases really carefully, and we are seeing that year-on-year increase, which we believe is because we are getting it right. I think we're also probably building confidence around it in terms of victims having the confidence to report things because they're getting a better service when they do contact us, and we oversee this on a monthly basis to make sure that we aren't slipping back in that focus.
Thank you. In terms of the quality and timeliness of stalking investigations, which obviously has a bearing both on the public confidence that you referred to and the ultimate number that are solved, how do you currently assess quality and timeliness in this kind of investigation?
because it is such an important crime, as I've described, because of the impact it has on people being stalked. Every single month we dip sample some stalking investigations and we look at the quality of what's happened. Have we got the facts properly recorded? Is the investigation progressing with the right lines of inquiry? Have we put the right interventions of safeguarding support and advice around the victim? Have we arrested the offender? Are we gathering the evidence to arrest the offender? And so that is looked at meticulously on a dip sample basis, month on month, and any shortcomings are then corrected, and then taken to two oversight boards in the organisation, one chaired by my assistant chief constable who leads crime fighting, the Solving Crime Board, innovatively named, and that is ultimately overseen by my deputy chief constable at the Force monthly performance board. So a really clear dip sampling and learning process.
Thank you. There was a couple of years or so ago a national super complaint taken by a number of charities that support victims in this area that gets investigated by some of the national oversight bodies. One of the recommendations in that recommendation 20 was for forces to improve how online elements of stalking are responded to, and there's particular commentary in that around that being often an area that is under-recognised as a part of stalking. How's the constabulary implemented that recommendation?
Thank you. We've taken that really seriously and accept the findings in full. I think it's the right thing for me to start by saying we've improved the way we capture the information about stalking to break it down where the offending is online. So we understand where it is not in the physical space. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's through Facebook. Maybe it's through social media where this stalking offences are happening. We have got a dedicated what we call a digital media investigation team. So teams of staff and officers who are specifically trained to recover evidence from the online space. And they're available to the investigators and help the investigators recover that evidence so we can take the action that we need. We have also given targeted training to officers and staff doing the basic investigations about the fact the digital media team are there, how they might be able to get that help. So there's a joined up approach between the experts in digital media investigation doing the actual investigative work with the victim and the offenders. We've also, thinking about the victims, we've got specialist safeguarding, cyber kind of online security advice that we can do and reference victims into. So victims can do everything they can to make themselves safe and be safe from the offenders. And as I say, we track and monitor this incredibly carefully because it's so important.
Thank you. And what processes does the constabulary have in place to effectively support victims of stalking through an investigative or criminal justice journey?
Yeah, and a number of things, and actually these apply to all offences. We carry out something called an initial victim needs assessment. Not easy for me to say there, a bit of a mouthful, but as it says in the title, what is it this victim needs? We think about there are a national code of practice called the Victim Codes of Practice that says where a victim is vulnerable or being targeted in a way, there are certain things that then have to happen to support that victim. So, and again, we assess ourselves against every crime investigation. So therefore, every stalking investigation, have we got good quality needs assessment? Have we met with our codes of practice requirements? And in addition to that, again, as we talked about before, there are a number of specialist victim support services closely connected with the constabulary, specifically designed to work with victims. And part of that, there is a specialist independent stalking advocacy service with caseworkers who we make use of in appropriate cases.
Thank you. And some important work started this year actually in terms of behaviour change programmes with offenders as well as part of that. As well as the victims support, which is important. How does the constabulary assess victims' satisfaction in stalking cases?
Quite simply through bespoke survey with the victims of stalking cases to understand how they are feeling they've been looked after and treated. The most recent data suggests that 80% of stalking victims are indicating they're happy with the support they're getting. Clearly, there's room for improvement there because 20% clearly feel we could be doing some more, but we will continue to focus on that survey, making sure we're understanding how victims feel, and it covers things like ease of initial contact, whether the investigation is moving forward from the victim's perspective, whether they're getting regular enough updates, whether they feel they've been referred into the right support, whether we feel ultimately they feel we're taking the right action around the perpetrator they're talking about.
Thank you. We've talked previously in these meetings around some of the protective orders and powers available to policing. How does the constabulary use stalking protection orders to safeguard victims, and is the constabulary planning to continue to expand their use? And kind of linked to that one, again, go back to that national super complaint, one of the recommendations was to ensure that forces have a process to consider the use of stalking protection order in every case. Is that now happening in Hertfordshire?
Yes. A stalking protection order is something the police can apply to a court to get, and we are doing so more and more. Breaching that stalking protection order, once granted by a court, becomes a criminal offence and gives us then a power of arrest to intervene. As you say, recommendation 13 of the super complaint to the constabularies, police forces ought to get better at it. In the last year, up to May 2026, there were 32 full stalking protection orders in force across Hertfordshire and 5 interim orders. That is an increase from 18 full orders the previous 12 months and 14 the year before. So we've more than doubled over the course of the last 2 full years, and I'd like to see that continue. It's a high threshold we need to meet.
Yeah.
You know, the courts rightly expect strong evidence to give these restrictive orders, but they work, and we're really focused on it. And I would like to see us do even more of it. So again, in that 12 months where we had the 32 orders, there were 28 breaches, which resulted in 15 individuals being charged or cautioned, 6 warning letters being issued. 4 offenders are currently imprisoned, and 2 are waiting for court cases that may result in a further sanction. So this is a really effective means of controlling the behaviour of offenders, or indeed holding them to account if they don't with their behaviour.
Thank you. And actually, I think those numbers around how many of those orders get breached by offenders probably in itself illustrates what a pernicious offence it is. Actually, that even when those orders are in place and offenders are under scrutiny and have some controls on their behaviour, still that's very often that drive to continue behaving in that way.
I think that's right, and I think it also shows that the 32 orders that we had were clearly on the right people, given that we had 28 breaches against 32, and therefore, my teams, with my backing, I think have the confidence that we should do even more of this because we're picking the right cases. So what are the other cases we should be picking as well?
Thank you, and good to see a clear follow through in terms of enforcing those breaches as well when they happen. Thank you for that. Going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a national inspection, not Hertfordshire specific, carried out by the Policing Inspectorate around how online child sexual abuse is managed and how policing manages registered sex offenders, a really important area of work. What's your overall assessment in response to that report, and how does the constabulary plan to respond to its recommendations today?
Thank you, Commissioner. I welcome the report. As you said, this is another incredibly important area of policing. For so many things that we do talk about are incredibly important areas of policing, but the investigation of child abuse and online child abuse and the investigation and management of sex offenders in our community to prevent them from causing more harm to others is hugely, hugely important. The recommendations within the thematic report from HMIT are there's lots of them, but they cover some really important areas. We have a process whereby every single thematic report, including this one, every recommendation is logged. And we have an oversight board chaired by my deputy chief constable, where we go through each of the recommendations and make sure we're acting upon them. The broad areas within the reports that are highlighted are, and yes, it's a national report, not specifically about Hertfordshire, but we're absolutely benchmarking ourselves against it. We must make sure we've got really effective processes to prioritise and risk assess. Quite often there's more work than you can do, and you have to make a choice about where you start. That you've got the right training and staffing levels to do all the work you need to do. That you're really proactive with your use of arrest and bail where needed. That there's really good governance and oversight of caseloads. That you're following the national guidance, and there's lots of it. And that the people doing this work, amazing people doing this difficult, incredibly difficult work, have got the right support, psychological health screening, because of the things they're having to look at. I probably don't need to describe in any more detail, but they are having to look at indecent images of abuse of children, for example. So supporting our people. All those are recorded, and we're working our way through every single one of those, because I want us to be supporting the outstanding people doing this hugely important work.
Thank you. And those teams are remarkable in the work they do, and the pretty horrific stuff they have to deal with. They do it really well in Hertfordshire, and get a lot of very dangerous people long jail sentences as a result, which is good. The inspectorate highlighted nationally the demand for online child sexual abuse investigations consistently exceeds resources, and I think they refer in the report to there being about a 2/3 increase in referrals into local forces from the National Crime Agency between 2023 and 2024. They looked at, I think my understanding is that trajectory is only continuing and expanding. We would all want there to be more money and resources going into this area, but kind of given all the constraints that are placed on policing, how is the constabulary seeking to try and manage that demand and the sustainability of officer workloads?
Well, I think that the real honest starting point here is that there is more work here than we have the capacity to do at the pace we'd like to do it. So we do have to prioritise, and we have really effective systems to say what is the highest risk, and then what's the next tier down at risk, and we're going to start with those cases. So we have to make some choices, because money and resources is not endless, and as the report highlighted, very sadly, the referrals into the organisation very often from national and international agencies is going up and up and up, because a lot of this offending originates indeed it can sometimes outside of this country. Yeah. So as technology improves, the level of awareness goes up. All that said, we are highly effective at prioritising. We do move forward the highest risk cases with an absolute degree of urgency. We've got a really clear system to do that, and we have some plans that are being enacted now and will come to fruition through the autumn, where we are reviewing and restructuring the area of work that these amazing teams work into to build more capacity to do more work more quickly. So specifically around child abuse, for example, we've looked at the processes, and we're separating out the teams that do the enforcement, the kicking in the doors, the arresting of the people, the seizing of the computer equipment and similar, and the teams that are doing the investigating, the painstaking work of recovering the evidence, putting the files together and going to court, because we think that will give us an economy and efficiency of organisation that will allow us to get through more work more quickly. But it is a constant challenge that we are grappling with. We're doing well at it, but it is needed.
Thank you. The inspection nationally identified some precious forces around the capacity and timeliness of digital forensic examinations of devices that sit at the heart of all of this. This is what all involved. Very often, many devices for each investigation. How's the constabulary balancing those pressures and managing them?
It's almost an extension, Commissioner, this one of my previous answers. So the investigation teams, let's say they execute a warrant of a suspected offender in this space, and they will seize phones and computers, and quite often that may be multiple phones and computers. And they will go into our digital media investigation team, who are the people with the specialist skills to recover things off SIM cards, off hard drives. But quite often the offender didn't want us to find, that isn't easy to find. So we do have backlogs in that work, recovering the evidence from computers and phones and similar. So if I give you snapshots as of this morning, the digital forensics team currently have 97 computers and 166 phones requiring some work. That's across the board for all investigations. But a good chunk of those will be for this type of offending. And the prioritisation process that the child abuse teams go through, this is high risk, this is a lesser risk, informs the prioritisation of the digital teams in terms of which phones and computers they look at first. So we absolutely recognise, and it is right to say that managing this business is tricky, but through prioritisation, we think we're taking the best approach to it. If I had, Commissioner, and you and I have had lots of conversations about this, if I had an additional ability to invest more money in more people, which we don't have at the moment, this is probably an area where I would want to invest in, because it enables so many of our investigative teams to lock up more people more quickly.
Thank you. And I would really love us to have that additional money to go to do it, to exactly access really good area, as you said. In terms of the teams doing this work, can you talk me through the kind of training and support that's provided to those teams, and in particular kind of the welfare and well-being support, given as we touched on a moment ago, they are dealing with some of the most horrific offending in society?
Yeah, so these are specialist investigators, and the team, these officers and staff, they will very often go through nationally approved training courses to do the sorts of things they need to do. So the assurance I can give you is that the people doing this work have that specialist training and those qualifications to do what it is they need to do to best effect. There's an abundance of national guidance, approved professional practices it's called, that we need to do as we go through these investigations. And again, we check and support the teams through the supervision processes to make sure we're getting that right, because it's such a high risk area of business. As you rightly say, a key part of that is supporting our people who do this work. And there is mandatory psychological annual screening for officers and staff, where we sit down with them and have a conversation about what they're dealing with, how they are dealing with the things they're having to deal with. And, that kind of separation between work and home and normal life is a really important conversation to have. And sometimes people need a break from this kind of work. So that process is there as that safety valve. I think we've got a little bit more work to do, because in addition to that screening, there's something called, it's a bit of a mouthful, trauma-informed training. So I think we can do more work with people in this space. I think we need to do more work. We've identified that as something we absolutely want to move forward in the coming 12 months, because, as I said a number of times quite deliberately, that people doing this work are doing some of the most difficult, dangerous, awful things brilliantly, and they need the very best support.
The report nationally identified that some forces were overusing released under investigation kind of while that work happens. How does the constabulary ensure that's being used where appropriate, and that other strategies, arrest and bail and things are being used appropriately, and how's that balanced across investigations?
Thank you. It's a really important. So when someone is arrested and comes into custody, a number of things can happen. They can be charged with an offence and go to court. They can be released and the investigation concluded, or sometimes people are released and the investigation is to carry on to see if we can get to a point of charge. And when that happens, the constabulary has two choices. We can release them on bail with conditions to do things or not to do things with a set time to come back, or we can effectively release them unconditionally, called released under investigation. And there are those two choices. That's what the report was getting at. Forces weren't using bail as much as the inspectorate thought we should. We've set really clear expectations that if you don't get the point of charge, the first assumption is bail, because it puts an onus on the offender not to, what can put a condition on the offender to do or not to do things, and gives a very clear timescale to come back to custody. If the conditions aren't met to do that, or the risk assessment is such, only then will we release them under more broad investigations. So, and again, that is scrutinised really carefully to make sure that we are getting that right. If I look across the macro level, the constabulary has twice as many people released on bail as it does released under investigation, which tends to reassure me. Starting assumption by investigators is bail, often broad release under investigation.
Thank you. That's useful reassurance. Thank you. That I think covers that report nicely, and I'm sure ongoing work, as you said, in terms of some of those recommendations, but an area where I said have really high confidence in the constabulary's work and the team in that space is absolutely excellent. And indeed, I think this team is the year review will last few constables.
Correct, it was.
I'm going to move on then to some slightly broader points around that release under investigation point that was brought out in that last report that we were talking about. And just wanted to understand a bit more around the kind of governance in place to be managing and reviewing cases where people are released under investigation for longer periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's as I said, so I've described the process, but let's put that into some context. Hertfordshire Constabulary is a relatively low crime area, but we investigate 7,000 crimes a month. And roughly speaking, we arrest about 1,000 people a month. So there's some context. On the 8th of June this year, there were 1,072 people released under investigation. And there were 2,188 people released under bail. So just over 3,000 people, which equates to just under half a month's crime, or about 3 months worth of arrests, were released from custody, and we were continuing with our investigation. So it gives you some sense of scale, I think, there. We have, as you would expect, a performance database where we manage that. My senior teams, from team leaders through to people running teams and departments, through to my chief officer team, will look at this information month on month and make sure that things are being progressed. And we can break that down by time. And the older things get, the higher the level of supervisory oversight that happens and the reviews that happen periodically against those. So a sergeant, after 7 days, reviews that to make sure it's progressing as we should. And then at 28 days does a secondary review, about a month's time. If we get to 3 months into an investigation and we haven't got to the point of making a charge or deciding the investigation is finished, the inspector needs to review it, so a more senior officer, and it gets to 6 months, this does happen because there's some complexity in our investigation, a superintendent has to review it. So we escalate the level of review to make sure that there's the right focus and energy on progressing cases on behalf of victims and dealing with the suspects properly where we can.
Thank you. That's useful. And when we're talking about some of those longer time periods that get up to that more senior review period, what are the factors that contribute towards those longer time periods? And is there anything being done by the constabulary to try and reduce them, or is that just the nature of some of those investigations?
All of those things, I think, is probably the top level answer, Commissioner. We certainly, there is no sense of delay or prevarication in how we investigate these crimes. I think there are probably three broad factors, possibly four, that affect the timeliness of investigation. Number one is the quality of supervision, really clear case action plans and really clear oversight support from team leaders, sergeants. Let's crack on with this. This is how we're going to get this to the right conclusion, constable or police staff investigator. So that is the first key. The other things that can cause delays are the complexity of investigations. We talked about it a few minutes ago. Detailed forensic investigation that might be needed at crime scene, detailed evidence of digital devices, that can take time. Sometimes it can take months to recover information out of devices because of the complex processes we need to go through. We need to work in partnership with the Crown Prosecution Service to consider evidence and bring evidence forward. And in the vast majority of investigations, it is only the Crown Prosecution Service who can agree, yes, the evidence is such that we now can move this to court. So there's a process of exchange of information and shared working there that can cause delays in some cases. All of those things taken together mean that it's not infrequent for an investigation to take 6, 12 months or beyond in the most complicated cases. What I can assure you of is, through that scrutiny process I've described, we are asking really difficult, challenging questions about where is this going from kind of month 1, month 3, month 6, those key points, to try and get justice for victims as quickly as we can.
Thank you very much. That's useful to understand. Thank you. Our next agenda item is an update on burglary outcomes, and I wanted to just return to this because of the March APM. When we last looked at this, you gave an update on some of the actions you and Chief Officer set in train to really try and drive forward the number of burglaries being solved in Hertfordshire. It's historically been at the lower end. What's been the impact of that initial bit of work?
We're arresting and locking up far more burglars. Is the good news I'm happy to share, and that progress has continued since the update in March. Since February, we really kind of turned our attention on this and said we must do better. We've seen the percentage of burglaries we solve go from a almost worst in country 4% to a kind of closer to top 10 in the country, nearly 13% of burglaries being solved. My ambition hasn't stopped there. I'd like to solve even more. But you know, in February we solved 19 house burglaries, in March 10, in April 25, in May 18. These are again relatively low numbers, so we're really starting to see a 2-3-fold increase in the number of burglars we're catching and people we're convicting. We've done that by creating a dedicated team. We look at patterns across burglary. Quite often it's organised, we cross border, and we've got tactics and capabilities that mean we're driving into that space. It's really promising. It's really great work. To give you just one example of a complex investigation that came to its conclusion in recent months. Operation Ghost Lock. We love to give names to things in policing. Correct. But that operation linked 31 different burglaries and 8 attempted burglaries and 32 cars that were stolen. 5 offenders were arrested as a result of cross-border work, but led by Hertfordshire investigators. 5 offenders were arrested and charged. All have since pled. 4 of the 5 have pled guilty in court already and are remanded in custody. They're in prison awaiting sentence. That's one example of many successes where the targeted approach we're taking, a laser-like approach on who are the burglars committing crime and harm in our county, is working. We are determined to do everything we can to keep it going.
Thank you. That's really pleasing progress. And you talked previously when we covered this about that goal of really driving the outcome rate up the kind of national pack, and so to have made that level of progress in that time is really positive. how are you planning to sustain that? And you talked about not wanting to stop there and go further. What's the plan to ensure that can now just become part of what the constabulary has been able to achieve on these cases?
Well, the team we built is a dedicated team. It's how we do business now, and that will carry on. So it's detectives, it's embedded analysts. That's their job. When they wake up in the morning, they think about catching burglars. When they come to work, they do catch burglars. When they, I say slightly metaphorically, when they go to sleep at night, they're thinking about catching burglars. It's a dedicated team. We've got forensic strategies. We've got detectives doing first response to burglary, so not just the response officers, but detectives turning up, looking at the evidential opportunities. We've got really clear processes where we do lock up offenders. We go then and revisit them, bring them out to prison and talk about other offending they may have committed that now it's in their interest to talk to us about, so we can clear up other offending. So there's just a huge range of things that we now have in place that will continue to give me confidence that we'll be able to sustain the improved levels of performance. You will always get ups and downs in the successes you have, and indeed we see the offending levels through the year fluctuate. The summer tends to be a time when we get less burglaries. The autumn, the winter, the spring, where we have the darker nights, we tend to see more burglaries. But just because we're coming into a quieter time of year for this type of offending, I know the teams are determined to use that time to actually target more burglars and catch them for stuff they might have done in the spring.
Brilliant, thank you. I know that work that team's been doing has had some focus around improving kind of victim focus and victim confidence. Can you talk a bit more about that and the kind of impact that's beginning to have?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important area for all victims, but we specifically look at a range of metrics, and we look at this over a number of years, and overall victim satisfaction has improved, particularly for victims who've been subject to the horrible crime of burglary, and we measure that statistically year on year, and we look at a range of things. Was a victim informed about what was going on? Were their needs on balance attended, and what was their overall level of satisfaction? Feeling informed has just tended to trend up. Overall satisfaction has tended to trend up. There are some areas in that that are a little bit more static or perhaps trending in the wrong direction. But most broadly, what victims are telling us is that they're pleased with what's happening. They're more pleased than they were last year and the year before. Excuse me. And we think part of that is the fact that they're getting a CID officer turning up really early. And we've got more success to tell them about because we're catching burglars more.
Thank you, and that's a really important part, isn't it, of someone who has had their home broken into in that way, actually just 5 minutes on to being held to account for what's happened to them. So thank you. I think that's in the space of about 3 months or so since we last looked at that. That's really impressive progress. So thank you, and well done to the teams that achieved that and keep it up.
Thank you. I should have said, Commissioner, as well, credit to my senior team here. So we run a monthly, as we do for many things, performance audit, specifically talking about this kind of type of burglary. It's personally chaired again by my deputy chief constable. He sounds like quite a busy chap, Andy Mariner, and he is. But he drives this. He's got a dedicated detective superintendent, and Alcock, a really seasoned, experienced, passionate detective, as I say, with a brilliant team of people around him that are delivering these results. And that those people are passionate about keeping this going.
Brilliant. That's good. Thank you. They're doing really well. Thank you. Our next item then is citizens in policing. So it was Volunteers Week last week, and we were pleased to be able to see some of the awards being given to some of the great volunteers doing great work to support the constabulary. So I just wanted to cover that as an agenda item for this meeting. How does the constabulary currently use volunteers to support its work? It's quite a wide range of volunteer options in
There absolutely is. There are 162 active police service volunteers supporting the constabulary. I'm told, across a range of areas from cadet leaders. So people supporting our police cadets, cyber specialist investigators, the poor dog handlers, not to mention the dogs, volunteers in our property team, in our special constabulary, and of course our special constables are all volunteers across welfare, puppy walkers and puppy fosterers, custody support teams, administrative roles. So across the organisation, we've got amazing volunteers helping us do the policing we need to do. I mean, there's some headlines within that. They're all fantastic. We've got 9 active cadet units with 250 young people between 13 and 18, learning about community service, learning about themselves, building confidence, building teamwork skills, supported by volunteers giving their time to the cadet leagues. What a fantastic thing! What an amazing thing that is. We've got 100 special constables with the powers of a fully fledged constable coming in, giving up their evenings and weekends, going out and policing our streets, keeping us safe. What an amazing thing that is. We've got volunteers coming in with rapport dogs, visiting some of our high risk, high stress, high octane teams like the control of others, like the child abuse teams, just to provide that kind of moment of light relief in what can be difficult, stressful, and emotional days. Across the board, we would not be as good without the 162 people who help us giving their time freely. They're amazing teams.
Thank you. They absolutely are, and you're actually right to highlight those who are supporting cadets and developing them, and police officers and teacher amongst those groups, which is great. Probably one of the areas of that breadth of volunteer work that the public would be most familiar with and would immediately think about are those special constable roles that you talked about. How does the constabulary utilise its specials kind of within its overall policing model to help prevent and solve crime and keep people safe?
Thank you. A key part of the team. There are 102 special constables. I think I said 100 earlier. Forgive me, I was 2 out. There are 102 special constables, 77 of whom are regularly and fully deployable out into our communities. They work significantly, but not exclusively, in our response teams, 24/7, 365 days a year, responding to whatever comes in next, helping people, catching criminals, reducing harm, and our neighbourhood policing teams, doing the same types of things, but on the more persistent, tricky community issues. But in addition to those, we've also got special constables in some of our more bespoke functions. We've got special supporting our road policing teams, keeping people safe on the roads, our specialist public order units, and our rural policing teams. So we've got volunteers, special constables helping across a number of areas of the core functions of policing and health, which is fantastic to see.
Thank you. It's really great, and they do brilliant stuff, which is great. I know regular officers really appreciate that additional kind of capacity that gives all of those teams as well when they have specials. In terms of, there's obviously a lot that then sits behind all of what those volunteers do in terms of the kind of recruitment, retention, engagement, training, support of volunteers. How would you assess that's going across the constabulary, and what priorities for development in terms of that volunteer support?
Thank you. I mean, it's a hugely important area, and it's an area that not just in Hertfordshire, but nationally has been quite tricky over the last, well, I'd say 3 or 4 or 5 years. Perhaps even since the times of COVID 2019, 2021, where volunteering for some reason seems to have become trickier for volunteers to give their time freely. So we're working really hard to make sure that we are attracting specials into the organisation, as well as regular officers, because we want both of those. So we have regular recruitment events, regular intake. So currently we've got 30 candidates in pre-employment checks to become a special constable, which against a kind of starting point of 102 would be quite an appreciable increase. Those special constables, when they are with us, get the same sort of training that our regular officers get. So the kind of support when you're a new special through tutorship to get the skills and the confidence to become an independent patrol officer. They become part of a team with a supervisory structure to give them that support and direction. And they come under the umbrella of my district chief inspectors. So the 6 chief inspectors who look after response and neighbourhood policing in Hertfordshire have specialists within their team. So they are absolutely integrated into the family. They do the same mandatory training that the officers need to do. So that might be code of ethics, it might be about other key learning points, but they do the same training because they are a volunteer, but they have all powers and therefore all the responsibilities of a normal officer. They're incredible people. I should have said as well, because they do some incredible work. If you look at 2025 for the year, there was nearly 30,000 hours of voluntary policing given by special constables, and already in 2026 we're well past 11,000 hours. So this is, it is absolutely preventing crime and solving crime to an even greater extent than we would do. So the volunteers are a huge part of what I call Team Hearts.
That's really impressive. Thank you, and our thanks to all of those people who give their time freely to support that work. They are great people and really valued. Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. I hope members of the public who've joined us found the session useful. We'll close it there. There'll be another of these meetings in July.